Right. Is there anything you'd like to add before we get to questions?
Well, I hope you all read the book, and I hope you make it your gift of choice. I'm just so thrilled that you are all here on a Friday night. I still can't get over it.
Well, let's talk about just how this one book campaign, how has it been for you?
Oh, it's been quite wonderful. I think that it's a writer's dream. It's one of those things that's, I think there are a lot of mixed emotions in that. You feel flattered, and you feel humbled, and you feel honored, and but there are times when it is very humbling, because I look at this system and I look at the size of this collection, and I think they chose my book, little old
book.
me, this little immigrant kid who came to Canada and whose first word of English was Coca-Cola. You know, they chose my book. You know, so it's quite overwhelming and humbling at the same time.
Well, we're ready for questions, and Tina, I'll give you
I think we'll get the mic.
There you go.
Good thing I'm so skinny.
And if you've read the book, try not to give it away for those who haven't.
My question is, do you ever plan to write a sequel to this book?
It hasn't occurred to me yet. I have been asked that. Not yet, but you know, books kind of have a funny way of flowering, so I don't want to say no, but I don't want to say yes either.
I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
I think you should write a sequel.
I have read your book, and I loved it. I loved it so much I went out and read your memoir. A question I have, and I probably have many, but one that I have, you talked about saving face and the importance of saving face in the culture. How has the Chinese group, either here in Canada or in China, taken some of the presentations you have given? As a matter of fact, you know, Mordechai Richler just has been written about so much. He had difficulty often in the Jewish community because of the way he represented things. The Jewish community wasn't always so happy. So I'm wondering how you have been received within the Chinese community.
I don't really know how I've been received in the Chinese community because this book hasn't been translated into Chinese. And so the Chinese people who have read the book have been Chinese people who can read English, which generally means that they're quite a lot more westernized. And I think when they bring that Western perspective with them, they'll probably bring an understanding that perhaps is closer to mine. So I can't answer that.
Maybe it needs to be translated into Chinese?
Maybe. My own family has been very, very supportive, and they're all here tonight, so I'm thrilled.
Over here.
Thank you. It's nice to hear you, Judy, actually tell the story. Because I read your book, I was reading it. I can't imagine what voice was coming with it, but now I think if I reread it, I'm going to hear your voice. I have two comments, and maybe you can give your own remarks. Number one, the book has no chapters in a formal sense. I didn't see any chapters. It's just one whole story. And the second one is, and there's a reason why I like this. You start the book by referring to 3 books. And I don't know if anyone who's read it has noticed that. And I think you end your story with back to the book again, or back to the two books, not the 3. But then throughout the telling of the book or the story, you seldom refer to this three books that you opened with. I don't know if those books are real as artifacts in your life, or you just invented them out of fiction.
Well, some of those, well, of the three books that are mentioned, there is one that is real. The other two are a piece of fiction. As far as the no chapter business is concerned, the book actually did have chapters. And then it was actually toward very, very close to the end, when it was almost getting ready for edit, that I started looking at it. And I thought, what would it be like without chapters? What would it be like as one continuous story, but with breaks in it, almost as if it was being told told in one session, but with just pauses for a drink of water or to go to the washroom or, you know, whatever, that sort of thing. And so I actually took out all the chapters, and I looked at it and read it again, and I decided that I wanted to go without the chapters.
So that was a conscious decision, not a publisher's decision. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even notice that. I just checked. You're right. There's no chapter. I really didn't even notice that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I have a comment and then I have a question. I've read your book. I got it for my 52nd birthday when it first came out from my younger sister. You autographed it for her, and I really, really enjoyed it. The comment was how your book's been received in the Chinese community. Well, I can't speak for the Chinese community, but amongst the CBCs, that's Canadian-born Chinese, which I'm one of, it's been very well received. I loved it, my sisters loved it, and her friends loved it. Now, the question I have was, like you said, your book hasn't been translated into Chinese. Do you have someone at your publishing house who are watching your back? Because you don't want some opportunist character from China to translate in Chinese and claim as their own. Like I heard that happening recently. And do you have someone in your publishing house watching your back for stuff like that?
My agent is here. Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, over here.
Yes, Judy, no question about it. You have become a fabulous writer. My question is, was it ever your goal, your aim, to attain in your writing the perfection that your husband has attained in his photography?
That's got to be a plant.
That's a good
Come on.
Louis is a friend of ours, and he's asking that because Michael has taken every author photo. So what can I say?
Oh.
That's a plant.
Okay, this one's not a plant.
You mentioned the theme of longing in the book. What did the parents long for that made them leave China in the mid-50s to come to Canada?
Well, in the book, the father actually came to Canada much earlier, and he went back to China several times. And the mother came because of the communists, you know, that's why they came. I think that they were a family who were very much the victims of history, because it would have been, because the father would have been someone who had always planned to return to China, to perhaps live out his days as a rich man, in the same way that my father had hoped to do. But with the communists in China, there wasn't any hope of going back to China, because they would have been severely persecuted. So they probably longed for a life that they had hoped for, and I would imagine that the China that they longed for probably didn't even exist anymore.
Yeah, I find that within the Italian community, a lot of people that came to Canada, they only came with the intention of going home. And so many of my mother and father's friends did end up doing that. They uprooted their children, went back to Italy, and found that Italy no longer existed.
That it no longer
and they came back.
Existed, and so they do often just get caught between two worlds.
It's true. More questions?
I have a question. Judy, I know you wrote a memoir subsequently to this, just came out last year, and I'm wondering if you could just talk briefly about what kind of journey you were on. Like what made you go back, and what did you discover when you went back?
Well, the memoir was something that I had been intending to probably write for a very long time, and I hadn't intended to write a memoir so much as I had intended to write the story of my mother. And the roadblock there, and I'm not giving I'm not giving anything away because it's in the first line of the book. And the roadblock there for many years was my father's suicide. My father had committed suicide when I was 22. And talk about saving face. This was something in my family that was never mentioned. We never, ever, ever spoke about it because it was just something that just cast such a shadow of shame. And I think that for me, to get around to writing that story, it really just took time more than anything else. And in 2005, my two brothers and I decided that we would go back to China. And I think it had to do with the fact that my brothers were getting on. They were both in their 70s. And they probably realized that if they didn't go back to China, that they would never go back, and they would never go back and see a sister whom they had left behind when they were young adults. And they were all old now, and the last time they had seen each other, they were in their late teens and early 20s. And I realized that with my brothers going back, that this was an opportunity for me to go back with them. And so the book, The Year of Finding Memory, really arose out of that journey. And even though it started out being about my parents here in Canada, it was really about my discovery of who they really were in China and trying to fit those two pieces together.
Remember Alice Munro said that lovely line about, you know, children never know their parents at all. They know them as their parents only, but never as men and women or anybody other than, you know, the sort of giver at the end of the day.
Yes. I still don't know my parents.
Over here.
Hi, I just want to make a comment more than a question. When I read the book, as I read any book, you always try and identify with the character or whatever. There was no way I could identify with an immigrant child coming to Canada because my family has been here for years and years and years and years, so I couldn't identify with that. But one character whom Laura said was the least likable, the mother, I identified or felt a kinship with her because I grew up in Toronto, right down in the Danforth and Coxwell area, and I loved the place. You could get on a streetcar, you could go out to Old Fort York, you could go to Riverdale. There were so many things to do and so many people around you. And then when I got a little older in my 20s and married, we couldn't afford a house here, so my husband had the bright idea of moving to Markham. So I moved to Markham in 1967, and I thought I had died and gone to hell because it was a small town. It didn't have a streetcar. To buy a pillow, I had to go to Stouffville. I thought, what? Where have I landed? So this poor woman, Sujan's mother, I could identify with how unhappy she was. And when she went upstairs and saw her accommodation, my heart fell too. I mean, yes, she, you know, as you say, she was the least likable, but she had a lot to cope with, and I felt very sorry for her.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that what every writer hopes to achieve in any piece of work is you present an emotional landscape that the reader will find some identity with. Because even though we come from different places and different backgrounds and have different experiences, I really like to think that the human heart really isn't all that different from one person to another. You know, that we all feel similar emotions and we feel them in different gradations and different degrees. So but thank you.
More questions?